Okay, buckle up, because this story is WILD. Did you know the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley? Just ROLLEDUP to the White House gate one morning, hand-delivered a letter asking to meet President Nixon, and wanted to become a secret federal agent to fight the drug culture he saw ruining America. Oh, and he brought the president a GUN as a gift. And the whole thing, actually, WORKED. He got the meeting, THEBAMEDAY, seriously. Number 5. The letter was handwritten. On American airline stationery. Okay, picture this. It's December 1970. Elvis is flying to Washington, D.C. He's looking out the window, maybe sipping a soda or something stronger. Who knows? It was Elvis. And he gets an IDEA, a big one. He's worried, genuinely worried, about the direction America is heading. He sees drug culture spreading, hippies, anti-establishment, edis, and he thinks, I, Elvis Presley, the king, can help. He doesn't call his manager. He doesn't get his fancy personal secretary to type something up on gold-embossed letterhead. Nope. He grabbed some American airline stationery right there on the plane. Like the free paper they give you. And he starts writing by hand. It's a 6-page letter. Folks, IXPAGES. Scribbled out mid-flight, full of passion, maybe a few spelling errors. Who cares? He's Elvis. Addressed directly to President Richard Nixon. He pours his heart out. He talks about how much he loves America. He talks about how he thinks the Beatles are partly responsible for a lot of the anti-American sentiment. Ouch. Sorry, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. He emphasizes that he's not some long-haired hippie weirdo. He's Elvis. He has reached the youth, and he can reach them again for the good of the country. He gets specific. He tells Nixon he's studied the drug culture. He's studied communist brainwashing techniques. He really believes he has unique insight. And what does he want? He wants to be made a federal agent at large. He wants a badge, credentials, the real deal from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, BNDD, the precursor to the DEA. He feels this official status will help him connect with people and fight the good fight from the inside, maybe even undercover. He signs off letting Nixon know he's staying at the Washington Hotel under the alias John Burroughs, one of his favorite go-to-fake names. He includes his phone number. He's serious. So, the plane lands. What does Elvis do? Does he send a lackey? Does he mail it? No way. Elvis Presley, international superstar, gets in a limo, probably still wearing whatever cool threads he flew in, and heads straight for the NORTHWESTGATE of the White House. It's early morning, like 6:30 a.m. He walks up to the security guard, maybe flashes that $1 million smile, and hands over the handwritten letter on airline paper. This is for President Nixon, he proudly said. Cool as a cucumber. Imagine being that security guard. Elvis Presley just handed you a letter for the PRESIDENT on airline paper. Requesting a meeting? To become a secret agent. You'd probably think you were dreaming, or it was a prank, but nope, it was real. The letter made its way inside, kicking off one of the strangest and most fascinating encounters in White House history. The sheer audacity of writing that letter on the fly, then personally delivering it to the gate like ordering a pizza, only Elvis. He wasn't just name-dropping either. In the letter he mentioned his collection of police badges from various departments across the country, highlighting his respect for law enforcement. He detailed his own financial success, stating he wasn't doing this for money, but purely out of patriotic duty. He wanted Nixon to know he was a serious, concerned citizen who just happened to be the most famous entertainer on the planet. He emphasized his ability to reach people Nixon couldn't, to go places and talk to crowds in a way politicians simply weren't able. He presented himself as a potential secret weapon in the culture war. Think about the contrast. The formal, often stiff world of Washington politics suddenly confronted with this raw, passionate plea from the king of rock and roll, written on the back of an airline's notepad. It's a clash of worlds. Elvis wasn't following protocol. He was following his gut. He felt an urgency, a need to act, and he went straight to the top, using the most direct method imaginable. He didn't wait for an invitation. He created his own opportunity, fueled by genuine concern and, let's be honest, probably a healthy dose of Elvis-sized ego and confidence. He believed he could make a difference, and he wasn't afraid to ask for the power he thought he needed to do it. That crumpled piece of airline stationery carried more weight than anyone could have predicted. It wasn't just a letter. It was a demand for attention, an offer of alliance, and a peek into the complex mind of a superstar grappling with the changing world around him. The fact that it wasn't typed, wasn't formal, only made it more Elvis. It was personal, immediate, and impossible to ignore. The language in the letter itself is fascinating. It's respectful but also confident. He addresses Nixon as Sir, but also speaks plainly about his own fame and influence. He writes things like, "I can and will do more good if I were made a federal agent at large, and I have done an in-depth study of drug abuse and communist brainwashing techniques, and I am right in the middle of the whole thing where I can and will do the most good." He positions himself not just as a singer, but as an expert, a patriot ready for duty. He even offers to bring Nixon credentials he has from other law enforcement agencies to prove his seriousness. He assures the president, "I will be here for as long as it takes to get the credentials of a federal agent." He wasn't just asking for a quick photo op. He was asking for a job, a mission. And he was willing to wait. This wasn't a whim written and forgotten. It was a plan, hatched at 30,000 feet and delivered directly to the doorstep of power. The journey of that simple piece of airline paper, from Elvis's hand to the president's desk, is a story in itself. Number 4. Elvis brought Nixon a gun and got it through security. Okay, so the meeting is on. Elvis gets the call, heads back to the White House. Later that same day, more on that speedy turnaround later. What do you bring the President of the United States when you finally get your face-to-face? A fruitcake, a nice tie. If you're Elvis Presley, you bring a gun. Seriously. Elvis was a known collector of firearms and police memorabilia. He genuinely admired law enforcement and saw badges and guns as symbols of authority and patriotism. So, in his mind, giving President Nixon a gun was a sign of respect, a gift from one powerful man to another. The specific piece wasn't just some random pistol. It was a commemorative World War II Colt 45 pistol, mounted in a fancy display case. It wasn't loaded, thankfully, but still a gun to the President. Inside the WHITEHOUSE. Now the logistics are a little fuzzy, but totally bonkers. Apparently, Elvis and his two buddies' bodyguards, Jerry Schilling and Sonny West, showed up at the White House gate. Elvis, being Elvis, was carrying the encased pistol with him. The Secret Service, understandably, was like, "Whoa there, King. You absolutely cannot bring that thing in here." Rules are rules, even for rock and roll royalty. But this is where it gets even more Elvis. He didn't argue or throw a fit. According to accounts, he calmly handed the cased gun over to the Secret Service guards at the gate, likely explaining it was a gift for the president. Protocol dictated it should be properly checked and delivered later. However, later inside the Oval Office, during the actual meeting with Nixon, Elvis mentions the gift. He tells Nixon he has something special for him. Nixon, probably intrigued, and maybe a bit bewildered by the whole situation, signals to his aides. One of them, Agil Bud Krogh, who was instrumental in making the meeting happen, retrieves the gun from wherever security had stashed it and brings it into the Oval Office. So there they are. President Nixon, looking presidential. Elvis Presley, looking like, well, Elvis, in a purple velvet suit and a giant gold belt. We'll get to the outfit. And Bud Krogh walks in holding a Colt 45 in a display case. Elvis proudly presents the gun to Nixon. He explains its significance. Nixon, according to Krogh's account, was actually quite gracious. He accepted the gift, admired it, and thanked Elvis. There are even photos of Nixon looking at the gun with Elvis beaming beside him. Think about that scene. In the tense atmosphere of the Cold War and Vietnam era, in the most secure building in the country, the president is being presented with a firearm by the world's biggest rock star. It's surreal. It highlights Elvis's unique status. Who else could even conceive of bringing a gun as a gift to the president, let alone actually pull it off? And it wasn't the only gift. Elvis also brought some personal photos of his wife, Priscilla, and their daughter, Lisa Marie, to show the president. He wanted to connect on a personal level, show him he was a family man. So, amidst the talk of fighting drug lords and communists, there were also moments of, "Here's my kid, isn't she cute?" It's just layers upon layers of strangeness and unexpected humanity. The gun presentation echoes Elvis's well-do. For him, guns weren't just weapons. They were symbols of American history, power, and the fight for justice, themes he clearly felt strongly about. Giving one to the president was, in his mind, the ultimate gesture of shared values and respect. It also shows a certain naivete, perhaps, about how things typically worked in Washington, D.C. You don't just casually bring firearms into the Oval Office. But Elvis operated in his own reality, and somehow, that reality briefly bent the rules of the White House. The Colt 45 wasn't just any gun, either. It was specifically chosen. World War II held significance for that generation, a symbol of American unity and victory. Presenting a commemorative pistol from that era, tapped into shared patriotism. The display case added an element of formality, making it clear this was a presentation piece, not something intended for use. Yet the core fact remains. Elvis Presley gifted Richard Nixon a handgun. The security aspect is worth dwelling on. While he didn't carry it through security checks, in the way we might imagine sneaking something past, the fact that it was allowed onto the premises at all, and then brought into the Oval Office during the meeting, is remarkable. It speaks volumes about the aide's desire to accommodate Elvis and perhaps Nixon's own curiosity. Bud Krogh, recalling the event, noted the unusual nature but also Elvis's clear, respectful intent. The Secret Service, having initially stopped the gun at the gate, ultimately deferred to the president's staff once the meeting was underway and the gift was requested from within the Oval Office. It was a breach of standard protocol, smoothed over by the sheer star power of Elvis and the implicit approval of the president himself. Imagine the scene from the perspective of a Secret Service agent that day. You start your shift, standard procedures. Then Elvis Presley shows up with a gun. You handle it by the book. Then, later, you get word. The president's aide needs that gun Elvis brought. You hand it over, knowing it's heading into the Oval Office. It must have been a head-scratching. Did that really just happen? Kind of day. The other gifts, the family photos, add another dimension. They show Elvis trying to bridge the gap between his larger-than-life persona and the man Nixon saw before him. He wasn't just Elvis the entertainer. He was also Elvis the father, the husband, the concerned citizen. Showing pictures of Priscilla and Lisa Marie was a way to humanize himself, to establish common ground with Nixon, who was also a family man. It was a strategic move, perhaps, but likely also a genuine expression of pride. Amidst the discussions of badges and drug culture, these simple photos offered a moment of normalcy, a reminder that behind the capes and gold belts was a person with a private life. The juxtaposition of presenting a Colt 45 and family photos in the same meeting perfectly encapsulates the unique, slightly bizarre, and utterly fascinating nature of the entire encounter. Number 3. The whole thing was arranged super last minute. Forget months of planning, scheduling, committees, and endless back and forth between teams. Elvis Presley basically willed his meeting with President Nixon into existence in a matter of hours. It's the kind of spontaneous access most heads of state, let alone rock stars, could only dream of. Here's the timeline, and it's nuts. Early morning, around 6:30 a.m., December 21st, 1970, Elvis delivers his handwritten letter to the White House Northwest Gate. Later morning, the letter makes its way from security up the chain of command. It lands on the desk of Bud Krogh, a young White House aide who happened to be an Elvis fan. Krogh reported to Dwight Chapin, another Nixon aide. Mid-morning, Krogh reads the letter. He's intrigued, maybe a little star-struck, but also sees a potential opportunity. He knows Nixon is trying to connect with different parts of America, maybe even the youth, in his own way. Krogh writes a memo to Chapin, strongly recommending the meeting happen. He argues Elvis is sincere and could be helpful to the administration. Late morning, early afternoon, Chapin takes the idea to Nixon's powerful chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman. Haldeman is initially skeptical. A meeting between the famously square Nixon and the flamboyant king of rock and roll. It sounds absurd. The potential for awkwardness or negative press is high. Nixon's schedule is packed. Around noon, Krogh, perhaps with Chapin's backing, writes another more detailed memo directly to Haldeman, making the case. He emphasizes Elvis's patriotism, his desire to help fight drug abuse, and his potential influence. He attaches Elvis's original letter. Crucially, he frames it as a potential PR win, a chance to show Nixon engaging with a cultural icon who, despite his image, shared some conservative values. Krogh highlighted Elvis's criticism of the counterculture and the Beatles, things Nixon would likely appreciate. Lunchtime-ish, Haldeman, perhaps swayed by Krogh's persistence, or maybe just morbidly curious himself, takes the proposal to President Nixon. Nixon surprisingly agrees. Maybe he saw the PR angle. Maybe he was genuinely interested in Elvis's offer. Maybe he just thought, why not? Nixon gives the okay. Around 12:30 p.m., Elvis gets the call at his hotel. The meeting is on for that very day. Around 12:30 p.m., 1 p.m., Elvis meets with Nixon in the Oval Office. Think about that. From Elvis handing a letter to a guard at dawn, to shaking hands with the president in the Oval Office by lunchtime. That's faster than getting a same-day doctor's appointment. It wouldn't have happened without Bud Krogh. Krogh was young, relatively low-level, but he saw the potential and he pushed for it. He recognized the sincerity, and maybe the glorious weirdness, in Elvis's letter. He knew how to frame it for his bosses, emphasizing the points that would resonate with the Nixon administration: patriotism, anti-drug sentiment, concern about the counterculture. His memo to Haldeman is a fascinating document. He wrote, Presley indicated that he thought the Beatles had been a real force for anti-American spirit. He said that the Beatles came to this country, made their money, and then returned to England, where they promoted an anti-American theme. He also highlighted Elvis's belief that he could reach some people the president can't reach. Krogh added his own assessment. If the president wants to meet with Presley, he is available this afternoon. It will not be necessary to alert the press. He pitched it as a quick private meeting. Haldeman's initial resistance wasn't surprising. The Nixon White House was notoriously controlled and image-conscious. An impromptu meeting with Elvis Presley, famous for swiveling hips and rock and roll rebellion, even if he was now positioning himself against the current rebellion, was off-brand, to say the least. But Krogh's arguments, possibly combined with Nixon's own complex personality, he could be surprisingly unconventional at times, won the day. The speed is the most stunning part. White House schedules are usually locked down weeks, even months, in advance. Getting unscheduled time with the president is incredibly difficult, reserved for major crises or urgent matters of state. Yet here was Elvis getting squeezed in between other official business simply because he showed up and asked, and because a couple of aides saw something intriguing in his request. Imagine Elvis waiting at his hotel after dropping off the letter. Did he really think it would work? Or was it a long shot? He must have been surprised, maybe even shocked, when the call came through. Mr. Presley, the president can see you now. This rapid turnaround wasn't just luck. It was a confluence of factors: Elvis's unique celebrity status, the specific content of his letter appealing to Nixon's political concerns, the initiative of a mid-level aide, Krog, and perhaps a certain what-the-heck attitude from the top, Nixon and Haldeman. It highlights how sometimes even in the rigid structures of power, personality, and timing can create extraordinary, unexpected events. The sheer improbability of it all makes the story even better. It wasn't planned. It just happened, like a weird, wonderful historical accident. The gears of government ground to a halt just for a moment to accommodate the king. Consider the usual vetting process for anyone meeting the president. Backhand checks, briefings, carefully planned agendas. None of that happened here. Elvis was essentially waved through based on his fame and the content of his letter. The aides involved, Crow and Chapin, took a calculated risk. If the meeting went badly, if Elvis said or did something embarrassing, it could have reflected poorly on them. But they went for it. The memos exchanged between the aides provide a glimpse into the internal scramble. Chapin's initial note to Haldeman was cautious. Crow has a potential meeting for you this afternoon with Elvis Presley. Crow's memo attached explains. Crow's memo, as mentioned, was more enthusiastic, making the case. The fact that this internal debate, decision, and execution all happened within a few hours is staggering. It suggests a flexibility, or perhaps impulsiveness, within the Nixon White House that contradicts its buttoned-down image. This wasn't a state visit or a planned celebrity endorsement. It was a spontaneous encounter born from Elvis's personal initiative. He wasn't invited. He invited himself, and astonishingly, the door opened. This aspect, the sheer speed and improbability of the arrangements, is one of the most curious and revealing facts about the whole affair. It tells us as much about the workings of the Nixon White House and the initiative of aides like Bud Krogh as it does about the unique power and influence of Elvis Presley. He didn't just get a meeting, he got it on his terms, his timeline, bypassing all the usual channels through sheer force of will and celebrity. Number 2. Elvis wanted a real federal narcotics badge, and basically got one. Let's get back to the core reason. Elvis wrote that letter on the plane. He wanted to be a secret agent. Okay, maybe not exactly James Bond, but he genuinely desired official credentials from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, BNDD. He called it being a federal agent at large. Why? His letter laid it out. He believed his fame gave him unique access and credibility, especially with young people. He felt he could go undercover, mingle with musicians and counterculture types, and gather information about the drug trade and anti-American activities. He saw himself as a patriot uniquely positioned to help the government. He wrote, "I can and will do the most good if I were made a federal agent at large. I would love to help." He wasn't kidding. This wasn't just a vague desire for a souvenir. In the Oval Office meeting, Elvis directly asked President Nixon for the BNDD badge. He reportedly emphasized his seriousness, his study of the issues, and his collection of other law enforcement badges, which he apparently brought with him to show Nixon, along with the family photos and the gun. He wanted Nixon to understand this wasn't a joke. He wanted to be deputized in the war on drugs. Now Nixon couldn't just snap his fingers and make Elvis Presley a fully empowered federal agent with the authority to make arrests or conduct investigations. That's not how it works. There are training requirements, background checks, though Elvis probably thought his fame was check enough, and legal framework. The title Federal Agent at Large didn't even really exist in the way Elvis seemed to imagine it. But Nixon, ever the politician, saw an opportunity to grant Elvis's wish symbolically, while also getting a great photo op and pleasing a potential ally. He listened patiently to Elvis's passionate pitch. According to Bud Krogh, who was in the room, Nixon was actually quite taken with Elvis's sincerity, so Nixon agreed to give him a badge. Not the mythical agent at large credential, but an actual honorary BNDD badge. These weren't typically handed out like candy, but they could be given to civilians as a gesture of goodwill or recognition. Nixon instructed Bud Krogh to fetch one. Krogh, who had anticipated this might come up, remember it was the central request in the letter, had already made arrangements. He quickly procured an official BND badge. The moment Nixon presented the badge to Elvis was apparently quite emotional. Elvis was reportedly thrilled, overwhelmed even. He saw it as validation, as acceptance into the world of law enforcement he so admired. He felt he now had the authority he craved. And then came the hug. Yes, Elvis Presley, overcome with gratitude, spontaneously hugged President Richard Nixon in the Oval Office. Nixon, not exactly known for his warm and fuzzy public persona, was apparently surprised, but went with it. Photos capture Nixon looking slightly awkward, while Elvis looks genuinely emotional. So did Elvis become a real federal agent? No. The badge was honorary. It didn't grant him any actual law enforcement powers. He couldn't legally carry a concealed weapon based on it, though he often did anyway, citing his collection of local badges, make arrests or conduct official investigations. But did Elvis believe he had received something powerful and meaningful? Absolutely. He reportedly cherished the badge and saw it as a symbol of his direct connection to the president and his commitment to fighting drugs. He showed it off proudly. For Elvis, it was real. It represented his entry into the establishment side of the culture war, he perceived. The irony, of course, is heavy. Elvis Presley, who would later struggle profoundly with prescription drug abuse, leading to his untimely death, was passionately asking the president to help him fight the drug culture. He genuinely saw illegal street drugs and the counterculture associated with them as a threat, likely without seeing the similar danger in his own escalating dependence on prescription medications. At this moment in 1970, however, his focus was outward on what he saw as societal decay, and he wanted that badge as his tool to fight back. The BND itself was relatively new, formed in 1968 by merging parts of the FDA and the Treasury Department. Giving Elvis an honorary badge was unusual, but perhaps seen by Nixon and his staff as a harmless way to indulge a supportive celebrity. They likely underestimated how seriously Elvis would take it. Bud Krogh later wrote that he perhaps should have been clearer with Elvis about the badge's limitations, but in the moment, everyone was caught up in the sheer strangeness and excitement of the encounter. The presentation of the badge was the culmination of Elvis's mission. He came to Washington with a specific goal, outlined in his handwritten letter, and against all odds he achieved it. at least in his own eyes. He walked out of the Oval Office that day with a tangible symbol of presidential approval, and he believed federal authority. The image of Elvis Presley, clad in velvet and gold, receiving a narcotics agent badge from Richard Nixon, remains one of the most surreal and iconic moments in American cultural and political history. It perfectly captures the collision of celebrity, power, politics, and personal crusades that defined this unique White House visit. The badge wasn't just metal, it was validation. Number 1. The outfit was a choice. We can't talk about the Nixon-Elvis meeting without talking about THEOUTFIT. Because, oh boy, what an outfit it was! This wasn't Elvis in a simple suit and tie, trying to blend in with the Washington, D.C. crowd. This was Elvis leaning hard into his Vegas-era flamboyant persona. He walked into the Oval Office wearing a deep purple velvet suit. Not navy blue, not charcoal gray, PURPLE VELVET. A massive gold-plated belt buckle. Seriously, this thing was huge. Like championship wrestler huge. It was reportedly a gift he was very proud of. A white shirt with a collar so big, it looked like it was trying to achieve liftoff. The points probably reached his shoulders. And the piece de resistance, a matching purple velvet APE, yes, a cape, draped over his shoulders, inside the Oval Office. To meet the President of the United States, add to this his signature sunglasses, which he apparently wore for part of the meeting, probably some flashy rings, and his perfectly coiffed black hair. The contrast with Richard Nixon in his standard presidential suit and tie, and his aides in their conservative business attire, must have been absolutely jaw-dropping. Imagine the scene, the staid, formal, historically significant Oval Office. Flags, presidential seals, antique furniture. And then, striding in like a rock and roll superhero, is Elvis Presley, draped in purple velvet and gold. Why did he wear this? It wasn't necessarily intended as disrespect. By 1970, this was Elvis's look. His stage costumes were becoming increasingly elaborate. Inspired by karate gis, he was a black belt, and infused with a kind of regal showman flair. The lines between his stage persona and his offstage life were blurring. For Elvis, this outfit probably felt powerful, maybe even appropriate for meeting the leader of the free world. It projected confidence, uniqueness, and stardom. It was his version of dressing up. The outfit instantly became iconic, inseparable from the meeting itself. The official photographs taken that day are famous, not just for the unlikely pairing of Nixon and Presley, but for the stunning visual contrast. Elvis looks like he beamed in from another planet, a planet where velvet capes are standard diplomatic attire. Bud Krogh, the aide who facilitated the meeting, later described Elvis as looking like a character out of a comic book. He meant it affectionately, but it captures the visual impact. Elvis wasn't just a musician. He was a phenomenon, and he dressed the part even in the most formal of settings. The choice of purple velvet is particularly interesting. Purple is often associated with royalty, luxury, and power. Was Elvis subconsciously or consciously signaling that the king of rock and roll was meeting the president, an encounter of equals in their respective realms maybe? Or maybe he just thought purple velvet looked cool. The giant belt buckle was also significant. Oh, these oversized, ornate buckles became a staple of his 70s look. They were symbols of his success, his extravagance, his larger-than-life image. Wearing it to the White House was a statement. This is who I am. And the cape. Well, capes are for suppreneurs. And maybe in his own mind on that day, wanting to fight drugs and anti-Americanism, Elvis saw himself as a kind of superhero, ready to leap into action if only the president would give him the signal and the badge. The outfit wasn't just clothing. It was armor. It was costume. It was a declaration. It ensured that even if the meeting itself had been dull, which it clearly wasn't, the images would be unforgettable. It cemented the encounter in the public imagination as the ultimate odd couple summit. Think about the photos again. Nixon looks like Nixon. Stiff, formal, perhaps slightly bemused. Elvis looks like a creature of pure charisma and spectacle. The visual dissonance is part of what makes the story so enduring. It's a snapshot of America in 1970, a nation grappling with tradition and rebellion, formality and flamboyance, all embodied in two men shaking hands in the Oval Office, one in a suit, the other in a velvet cape. It's also worth noting Elvis's physical presence. He was still relatively trim in 1970, before his later weight gain. He was undeniably handsome and carried the outlandish outfit with an unmatched confidence. Anyone else might have looked ridiculous, like they were wearing a costume. Elvis just looked like Elvis. He owned the look, making it seem almost natural, despite the incongruous setting. The aides, Krogh and Chapin, must have done a double take when Elvis arrived in this getup. While they were focused on the substance of his letter and the potential political implications of the meeting, the sheer visual spectacle couldn't be ignored. It added another layer of surrealism to an already strange day. Ultimately, the purple velvet suit and cape became legendary. It's the outfit everyone pictures when they think of Elvis meeting Nixon. It symbolizes the sheer audacity, the unique charisma, and the slightly weird sincerity of the king's unlikely mission to Washington. It wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a statement about Elvis himself, bold, iconic, and utterly unforgettable, even when standing next to the President of the United States in the most powerful office in the world. You just can't make this stuff up.